Welcome to part 2 of this series, and today I'm going to talk about the link here to Socrates. As you know, Socrates lived in Athens in the 5th century BC, and he is considered, or often considered anyhow, the founder of Western philosophy. At the same time, Socrates himself never wrote anything at all, and everything we know from about him is from his student Plato. And Plato recorded Socrates' ideas in his philosophical dialogues. And these dialogues, or some of these dialogues, contain clear discussions of rebirth and the soul. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We will start with his dialogue Meno. Because in this dialogue, Socrates proposes something radical, namely that learning is actually remembering. And he uses the Greek term anamnesis, which is called recollection. Yes, sorry about the hands. And his argument is that humans sometimes recognize truths that they have never been taught, for example, geometry. In his dialogue, Socrates questions a slave boy who has never studied mathematics, and by asking the right questions, the boy gradually discovers the solution to a geometry problem. And Socrates concludes that the knowledge was already inside the boy's mind, and therefore the soul must have existed before his time. He remembered. He understood by remembering. And Socrates helped him awaken those memories by asking the right questions. The second discussion related to this appears in Phaedo, and this dialogue takes place on the day Socrates is executed. Here he argues that life and death operates in cycles. And examples he gives: waking up comes from sleeping, and sleeping comes from waking up. And likewise, life comes from death, and death comes from life. If death ended everything, the cycle would stop. Instead, Socrates proposes that the soul returns again to life, which of course is a philosophical form of reincarnation. And if we return briefly to the concept of understanding is to remember, I will point you to how they help modern amnesia patients to get their memories back, to remember again. And they do this by presenting to them items that they cared about before they forgot everything, by introducing them to people they cared about, and by taking them to places that they have a strong connection to and so forth. The interesting thing is that this is to a very large degree what Maieutics is all about. And by Maieutics, I mean the process of being a midwife of the mind. Socrates' mother was a midwife of the body, he said, and he, as a philosopher, was a midwife of the mind. And the way they did this all over Europe, and probably elsewhere too, was to show sacred items that their forebears had seen before, take them to places that had been important before, sacred places. And this was the purpose of these sacred trees, of sacred locations, and indeed temples. If you, in a future life, return to those places, it would help you remember and therefore help you understand, because to remember is to understand. And this was Maieutics, midwifery of the mind, to help people give birth to themselves. Socrates also argued that how you live will affect your future existence. If you are ruled by wisdom and self-control, it will improve your future condition. And the point is very simple. Life shapes what comes next. Another important passage appears in Phaedrus. Here Socrates describes the soul as a chariot with two horses. One horse represents the noble impulses, the other represents the uncontrollable desires, and the chariot itself represents reason. If the charioteer controls the horses well, the soul will rise towards truth. And this is, another model for or of cyclical existence. Socrates did not insist on literal accuracy. He warns the listeners not to treat the myths too literal. And near the end of Phaedo, he says that no sensible person should insist that the details are exactly correct. Which, of course, is exactly what Maieutics says too in her Secret of the She-Bear. The myths are metaphorical. And he stresses, just like Maieutics, that the myths express a deeper truth about the nature of the soul. Let us return to the concept of reincarnation and Socrates, because according to him, the idea of reincarnation had an important purpose. It would encourage people to seek wisdom, to develop self-control, and to live responsible. If you are going to live again in the future and in this world, you will probably want the world to become better after all, right? You are not going to destroy everything or use up all the finite resources and such and just leave the problem for future generations. You're going to live more responsible. And I know I'm talking about Socrates here, but these ideas are not unique to Greece, ancient Greece. Similar themes appear in all the Eurasian ancient cultures, cycles of life, death, and so forth, which, of course, I explain in part 1. And philosophers like Socrates try to express these cycles in rational terms. And if you want a summarized message of Socrates, he says that life is not just an isolated brief moment. It is part of a continuing process of learning and development. And that should have meaning to you. Whether you describe it through philosophy or myth or symbol, these traditions try to understand the same mystery: how life continues through time. Now, with that said, you know that Socrates was actually executed because he was accused of basically atheism, of not believing in the gods, and for spreading immoral ideas to the youth. And you have to understand this in the light of what I've said about an exoteric version of our ancestral religion and the esoteric purpose. And of course, if you were the uncle in the party, in the family, arriving on the Yule Eve, and you just go out and tell the children Santa Claus is not real, it's just your dad dressed up, or it's just a neighbor dressed up to make you think he's real. Now, if they want their children to believe in Santa Claus, this is a catastrophe. The Uncle Socrates here is a naughty guy who ruins everything. And I believe that Socrates never existed, and that it is just a character invented by Plato, possibly to explain that you shouldn't do this. In short, you shouldn't be that uncle arriving at the Yule party telling the children the truth. You should let them find out themselves. At the same time, as Plato is telling us that there is a deeper meaning here. And I'm talking about this to make you understand how this should be applied in the future with an exoteric version and an esoteric version. And in order for us to go there, so to speak, we need to understand the esoteric purpose too. And we need to implement the, let's call it tradition in relation to our young, because they should be able to be presented with these ancient myths, with our ancient symbols, and be visiting our ancient sites. Take your children to museums to look at old items. Take your children to Lascaux Cave, to burial mounds in your country, to old menhirs, to all sorts of ancient sites. And when you do that, you are, in a sense, practicing Maieutics, paganism. You are helping them give birth to themselves. They will remember, and through remembering, they will understand. So even though I'm telling you, in effect, that, Santa Claus isn't real, I'm also telling you that you should tell your children that Santa Claus is real, and that they should find out themselves, and that you should assist them in that context by visiting museums, looking at ancient sites, going where your forebears went, and so forth. I also make this video to show you the difference between the exoteric and the esoteric version of our tradition, and to explain you the purpose of this divide. Both the exoteric version and the esoteric version has value. The charade has a purpose. At the end here, I wish to stress that everything I say here is fully in accordance with what we know, scientifically speaking. And if you are an atheist or if you are a pagan, doesn't really matter. If you investigate, if you look into this, you will understand the purpose of this. You will see how scientifically correct it is, and you will see how it holds value to embrace this worldview that our ancestors had for tens of thousands of years. If we, whether atheists or pagans or whatever you want to call yourself, if we embrace this ancient worldview, we are going into a future that is going to look brighter. To quote my great-grandmother, when a preacher approached her at her deathbed, first of all, she told him that he should get a real job and go take care of his family instead. But she also said to him that hell and heaven are conditions that we create here on earth. And if we embrace this ancient pre-Christian worldview, whether you're pagan or atheist or whatever, I think it will help us create a heaven on earth. And I don't mean a problem-free world when I say that, but I mean a world where we actually improve and become better and increase our understanding. And if you think about how we in one life suddenly develop new qualities or new abilities. When you reach puberty, all of a sudden you can procreate, right? If we look at this and transfer this picture to our own people, perhaps at one point in life of the people, we will develop new abilities and gain sudden insight that we now we lack completely.